just briefly, I thank you very much for having me today. I'm actually quite excited to talk a little bit about where we were at, where we're going, and how we're getting there together. For a little bit of context, I'm a chief strategist here at EBSCO, and we're a recent acquisition. I started and founded Zafira. We spun out of MIT about 16 years ago, where myself and others that had been working on the World Wide Web Consortium, semantic web standards and technologies, found ourselves at sort of crossroads where the standards were mature enough, but the benefits that we were hoping to see from the web weren't quite there. So we kicked off a company that basically helped organizations, nonprofits, biomedical, libraries, museums, archives, folks that were focused on sort of the intersection of large data and open web to leverage some of these technologies. This was based on a lot of the work that we started at MIT and a larger arc related to sort of my background in and around the intersection between sort of libraries, museums, archives, scholarly communication, but also business and academia. So that arc has been longer than I care to admit, but I'm actually quite excited about where we're at in the process, because it's a lot of things are coming down now that have been very exciting, and I'm looking forward to sort of talking about that. So when we started early on in the web, and it's quite remarkable when we think about just how pervasive the web technology has been in just the past quarter of a century. But when we started early on in this, defining a lot of the standards and technologies, defining a lot of the protocols, defining a lot of the architecture that is the web now, I had the opportunity of working with a lot of different folks that really were sort of foundational in the context of what we're now looking at as major search engines. And as an advocate of libraries and an advocate of libraries participating in this new information space, I found myself quite often sort of talking about the benefits and the richness and the connections that library data had in terms of helping scholarly communication, helping societies, helping culture sort of, take advantage of sort of the rich history that we have to offer. And the constant response I would get from them is, I just don't see it. And what they were saying wasn't that they don't believe me and they don't see the value in it. It's just that they were running, all of the harvesters that went into the search engines, and none of our data was part of that. So we found ourselves in a situation, quite early on where, the web was growing and libraries were, not part of that evolution. And what I'm particularly excited about is the opportunity of sort of doing a pretty major course correction relative to the information landscape of the web. The challenge that we have is that while our bibliographic records, MARC, MODS, MADS, fill in whatever standard you want, they're tremendously rich in the context of web technologies. But this data is really locked and invisible outside of the systems that created it, and not connected in the context of how the web thinks. We structured these data sets to serve particular purposes, but the richness of this data goes far beyond just the applications we created it for. And the opportunity of freeing this data from the catalog and connecting it with other data sources really sort of opens a new opportunity, both in terms of reaching users where they're at, but also being able to blend our data with other data sources to create new ways and new pathways of discovery. And BibFrame, if you hear about these technologies and standards, this is a library-centric, Library of Congress-led initiative, really about applying some of these approaches, but in the context of the bibliographic space. But rather than like MARC being specifically in the bibliographic space, it's building on, a low-level web technology standard, RDF, as a baseline for its domain vocabulary. And the opportunity of building off of RDF allows the data that we might be describing and surfacing in libraries to start to blend together with the data, from other communities that leverage the same foundation in terms of describing resources and data interchange. And that's what BiblioGraph is trying to do. It's a service that really is about accelerating our exposure of that library data to the web and creating these new pathways where we can reach users where they're at, but also combine that data with other data sources to create new and valuable ways in which we can add and reach and help others that might not think of us first, but where we have answers to the questions they're looking for. So this is a service that basically is provided for any academic, national, and public library of any ILS background to make their catalogs visitable and actionable in the web. It's designed to free that data from the ILS system and enable that library to publish their data to any application, any website, anywhere. Right now, libraries use BiblioGraph in a variety of ways. Frederick basically just gave a brilliant introduction on collections and living lists. The notion of creating these fit-for-purpose collections or being able to grab different kinds of subjects, blend them together, and make them living so that as content is added to your collection, if they match those subjects, those lists grow too. It's also being used to enrich resources with data from other authoritative data sources. The bibliographic data set is part of a story, but being able to blend that with Wikidata or different kinds of authority services really offers, a richer way in which that data might be discovered, navigated, and leveraged. And ultimately, really about driving more usage to the library from anywhere on the web. So surfacing this data and embedding it, surfacing this data to syndicate it, making this data available to other services that users go to ask questions that libraries have the answer to. So we're not trying to basically necessarily compete with other, paid for services, but if somebody's got a question, we can provide an answer, we should be an option for them to leverage. And that's in part the foundation of what BiblioGraph does. It takes the data, surfaces it, makes it more actionable, and then syndicates that data to any number of different variety of additional services that help users discover information. Google being the one that most people discuss, but there's other ways in which we make that possible as well. And finally, not just for each catalog, but the network effect of all catalogs. So in the context of surfacing one catalog in this framework, we have the opportunity of connecting that catalog along any dimension, people, place, thing, book, organization, etc., to sort of better understand what each of these entities, across libraries where we have things that are common and also things that are unique. And the process is fairly straightforward. It's a 5-step process that's about transformation, not translation, of records into resources, connecting those resources, enriching those resources, using those resources, and then measuring the impact of that usage so that we, in the context of libraries, can start to get a better sense of what's working and what's not when we're talking about reaching new patrons. And in the context of a single library, and Frederick was talking about this with the European Parliament, each resource is published and linked together in an individual data graph specifically for that library. And the numbers on the right here are just a quick example of the summary of that latest publication. 368,000 MARC records translated into 1.7 million different unique resources and connected through 13,000 relationships. The value proposition of that compared to other data sets can't be underestimated. The richness that we have in MARC in terms of the entities that we're describing and the relationships that exist natively in these standards is phenomenal, especially compared to sort of other industries. And the opportunity of exposing that where others can basically take advantage, and by others, I don't mean just humans, I mean machines. The opportunity of surfacing this data in the way machines understand this allows for that data to be used and consumed in other ways. When Frederick was talking about using and embedding carousels, whether they were grids, lists, or otherwise, what's happening is a snippet of very highly structured data is being injected into the web in which the machines understand. So for every particular page that we publish, while we may look at it from a human from one way, the data on the right-hand side reflects what the machine understands relative to information about that page. And if we think about the fact that we're just exposing 2.7 million different resources that have this kind of richness just in one library, is a very exciting opportunity to describing the granular levels of assets that we're talking about, and depending on how people are looking for them, create new pathways to connect. So when we talk about human readable and machine readable, the credit card is sort of the easiest way of thinking about it. However it's styled, colored, stamped, emblems, badged, the human will see this one way, but from a machine standpoint, the chip is what helps drain your wallet. The chip is what helps accelerate purchases. It's the thing the machine sees, and being able to start to expose those chips for every single page allows for those machines to act on those pages in a way that we couldn't do previously. And that's really, from a larger arc standpoint, the way the web has been developed. We talk about linked data, semantic web, the low-level technologies, RDF, OWL, Sparkle, SCOS, and as all of those were part of my wheelhouse as being part of the semantic web activity, I apologize for all the poorly named acronyms. But the large arc of that is really about weaving a web of data and a web of documents together. And that process is an ongoing one. That process is an evolving one. For those in the European Parliament, one of the things that I hope to basically be able to share very quickly, is as our rules and understandings, improve, we have the opportunity of basically making a lot of the data better as well. So even in the context of the 2.7 million resources, the European Parliament does a great job of associating authorities with subjects. And while the current product, doesn't do as good of a job as I would like, and I say that as the architect of the current product, the new product does this better. So the ability to start materializing not just the subjects, but their authorities, being able to connect things together with authorities, that's where we're evolving and proceeding right now. So in the context of a single library, there's a lot of value, but in the context of a graph of those graphs, it becomes even more. And the ability to start to look at things that are absolutely rare or very common across any dimension of our catalog is what the network of these networks provide. Early on, I was fortunate to be part of the Dublin Core Metadata Initiative. And as a founder and associate director of that, I was in awe by, the collaboration and community aspect of that. And one of the foundational aspects and philosophies of the Dublin Core was, we are all smarter than any one of us. And that's been a foundation that we've applied really in the context of BiblioGraph as well. Individual libraries being part of a larger arc of visibility and a larger arc of actions is a powerful opportunity, but being able to connect those with other libraries, museums, archives at the national, regional, and local levels really provide a new opportunity for us to surface highly credible, highly contextualized, highly valuable data to a web that is desperate at the moment for that credibility layer. And the opportunity of us doing this together is one that is very, very, very exciting. So being able to look at ourselves in comparison to others, being able to see how we connect to others, while at the same time reaching new audiences and connecting new resources, and being able to connect to other resources and other collections traditionally thought of outside of our library community, is the opportunity of what BiblioGraph has to offer. And I'm pretty excited about the fact that in the context of this story, the recognition that the Library of Congress, not only in terms of leading the BibFred initiative, but starting to make this foundational in the context of Folio and the library community in general, is the new part of that arc that we're now moving into. And that opportunity in terms of taking these ideas, weaving them into, other applications like Folio, creating networks of Folio and becoming sort of foundational, as a basis for, the new norm of libraries, is what the Library of Congress is signaling moving forward. So in short, the power of one is great, but the power of many is greater. And the opportunity of unlocking these catalogs, transforming, our rich legacy data into a language that the web speaks, weaving it with other data sets, weaving it into the foundation of the web, and meeting users where they're at, is a key tenet to, what this product and service is designed for. And the opportunity of participating in this, it's not about gaming a system. It's not about SEO. It's about speaking the way the web understands, surfacing the value of our content, which is truly valuable in the context of the web, and reaching new users where they're at, is what BiblioGraph and the journey of that arc is all about. So I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you, Eric.
Not remarks, everything.
So we were asking, Rowan was asking very boldly for questions, remarks, criticism, and you said you have a lot of questions?
Well, at least two.
At least two. Go ahead.
Hello, Eric. Thanks for the nice talk. My name is Andreas, and I have two questions. So the first question is, maybe I say like that, are you at EBSCO at the right place with your job? Because wouldn't it be better to go back to your first job, OCLC, and use the WordCap to do this? Because then you would have the library link network at a glance. Second question is, how do you see the future of the role of metadata of catalogs when you see the open access going on? So will the data still be in some catalogs, or is this a horse that is dying slowly but surely? Thank you.
Thanks, Andreas. Great questions. I mean, I have a huge fondness for OCLC. I have to, that's just a foundational disclaimer. I'm a big fan of their mission and a big fan of what they do. I'll just say that during my tenure there and then during my tenure not there, I worked with them very closely on many of these ideas. Unfortunately, at the time, this just wasn't their business model. This wasn't, the notion of the portability of the data, making the data more actionable, making the data more, freely used with other data sets. just wasn't part of their business model. You know, recently there's indications that that's changing, which I think is nothing but fantastic. But, you know, until, you know, however we get there, my interest is in surfacing this rich data, connecting it with each other, and then connecting it ultimately with users, however they're looking for it, you know, through whatever device, through whatever service. You know, if we in the library community, you know, have the opportunity of answering that question that they're asking, we should be part of that solution. So I'm excited that, you know, others are now starting to, you know, follow this and be part of this story. But, you know, the fact that we allow for this, regardless of whether there's a membership or regardless of whether of your ILS system, you know, this was for us, you know, a way of accelerating this vision. And, you know, but I am glad others are starting to follow. And as far as metadata goes and the future of this, you know, I actually think there's still a tremendous opportunity. And I'm not, you know, biased necessarily into whatever format that we choose to basically use. You know, I've seen incredibly rich RDF data and incredibly poor RDF data, incredibly rich MARC data and incredibly poor MARC data. I think from a standpoint of the future of this, I think, you know, we're catalogers first or organizers first, and the sort of format is second. I think the key part of where we should be thinking about is what's the biggest value that we can offer in terms of our metadata, and how, as a community, can we become the most efficient. And what I mean by that is, well, I've had the fortune at the Web Consortium and other places of working with a lot of different communities that are focusing on, let's just say, metadata. Whether it's the library community or the pharmaceutical community or the bioinformatics community or the financial communities, the library community is by far the most collaborative in terms of their philosophy, but they're the least efficient in that collaboration. And the opportunity of making or helping accelerate that efficiency of collaboration around metadata is part of what, you know, we're trying to accelerate. Andreas, does that answer your questions?
Well, in some kind, yes. Thank you. You didn't say the word WordCat.
I didn't.
Hey, but Eric, since we are talking to a different crowd than the one that was attending yesterday, I'm afraid you'll have to repeat a few things that Gloria said yesterday. And one of the questions was, what exactly is required to get the Google syndication going? You know, because almost everybody, well, everybody is really interested in the Google syndication, right? So it's all about popularizing library data, and that is the way of popularizing that. So maybe you can sort of speak to some of the cases where we achieved that Google syndication, such as in the UK just recently.
Yeah, I can speak on it, you know, from a couple different dimensions. You know, we're fortunate to work with Google, you know, as a dedicated, you know, data partner, you know, every 2 weeks. And, you know, we've been doing this since now about 2017. We've been helping Google learn about libraries. Prior to us starting, you know, working with them, you know, libraries were bookstores that sold books for $0. And the notion of borrowing something just wasn't part of, their mindset. I'm pleased to say that's changed, and that's changed actually very significantly. Every library that we publish in the network is syndicated directly to Google every 24 hours. Whether they activate the knowledge panel in a particular region is dependent on a couple things. As of a while ago, it had to basically be activated if one, the knowledge panel was activated, two, if buy actions were activated, then borrow actions could be activated. Meaning the knowledge panel had to be activated first as a service that created enough value of the knowledge panel in the context of the region. So that's one threshold. The other threshold was having booksellers be able to sell books in that region. And the third was then the ability of using us to sort of borrow in a library near me. Now, I'm pleased to say that the constraint of buying is no longer a constraint. So knowledge panel activation is fine, but the traffic that we're helping generate on borrow is now sufficient enough that by itself, without requiring buy actions, is now possible. The real challenge, and this is just as, and I don't expect this to be a huge surprise, but we don't control Google's schedule. The indications, though, of helping move that along are the combination of activating in a knowledge panel and making sure that the knowledge panel is again valid for that region. But now having a density of libraries within a region, is another candidate for that activation. And what I mean by that is it's still, for the most part, geographical, meaning country by country. But if we find that we have reached a certain density of public or academic or national libraries within that region, that can now be a candidate for activation. I can't tell you how long activation takes, but the combination of being significant enough that we no longer have to wait for sellers to sell books before borrowing is an option, is a good indication that we've reached parity at that level. Our challenge is collectively to turn on libraries within a region, in enough density that is worth Google's attention. That density doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be over 50. And if we can start to do that in these other regions, like we've done for the United States, Canada, UK, and Australia, those are now opportunities for us to work with Google to turn on together.
Eric, Claudia here. The density, I'm not sure if I missed something maybe, but is the density the number of libraries compared or related to the overall number of libraries in that country? Or would it depend also on how much percentage of the population are reached by these libraries, and how would this be determined?
It's more of a population issue, Claudia. The opportunity of reaching more eyeballs is and still remains the business proposition of Google. So it'll be a combination of the number of libraries, but it will be more of a combination of the number of libraries and the density of those populations in which the libraries serve.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else?
Well, maybe Eric, you have a crystal ball, and maybe you can prognosticate let's say, the evolution of the role of linked data in particular and data science in general in libraries, say in 10 years from now. Do you think there's going to be an evolution with that goal in mind, or with that
I do. I foundationally do. I think it's important to recognize that libraries have actually been, part of the calculus, part of the contribution of linked data. Meaning, libraries have been a key part of the design of RDF schema, OWL, etc. It's a blend of different disciplines that have been brought into this. But libraries have been at the foundation of those designs, since they began. And it's not terribly surprising if you look at libraries from a historical standpoint and the kind of data we create. We've dealt with disambiguation, as an industry more than almost any other industry. And even though there's a lot of other industries that are coming on right now in terms of entity extraction and MLAIA and other things like that, disambiguation still remains a challenge. If you look at MARC from a standard, the notion of trying to disambiguate people, places, and things and create relationships, whether they're the MARC relator codes or terms or anything else like that, that has as rich of a vocabulary and as rich of a linked data network as any that I've seen. So the notion of applying, when people think about, from my perspective of MARC to BibFrame, this isn't a radical, revolution. This is a natural evolution. So the notions of building on that foundation and starting to move, not necessarily from, not just say original cataloging, but more of contextual relationships, is sort of a key part of that. The other aspect of this that can't be underscored enough is the credibilities that libraries have in this space. The value proposition, when anyone can say anything about anything, who says it is a key part of it, and why they say it is a key part of it. And the trust that libraries have in the physical space, I believe, actually does translate to the web. And our opportunity, when I talk about reshaping the information landscape, I think very much of surfacing these data and as stewards and curators and connectors of this data, creating that value that, isn't pushing an agenda, that isn't pushing, a business. It's pushing learning. It's pushing relationships. It's pushing knowledge sharing. And I think that as an industry is an opportunity for us to evolve into. So I think it's a natural evolution, and it's a key part of the foundation of a credible web. I'm pretty excited, to be honest. And I'm every library that joins the network and every part of that conversation just makes that opportunity more and more real.